the human being in me said, wow, that's amazing. The scientist in me said, how? So that's when we started doing our own independent research. And that's when I started calling in neuroscientists and biologists and quantum physicists. To look to see what was going on.
Check one, check.
Dr. Joe, how do you define when someone asks you what it is you do?
I teach people the neuroscience and the biology of what it really means to change. And I think when we change, our life changes. So my interest is to demystify that process so that people have within their reach the tools to make measurable changes in their lives.
And what is it you're drawing upon? What experiences, what studies, what research are you drawing upon to give the world these solutions?
I was interested really in the transcendental experience, the transcendental moment. So when I started teaching this work, I taught the work because people were asking, how do you do it? Like, how do you change your life? And what does it mean to change? And so I want to provide people the information where they can actually learn the information, make new connections in their brain. That's what learning is. Repeat what they've learned to the person next to them, build a model of understanding so you can remember it. Remind yourself what you've learned because it's so much easier to forget this information than to remember it. So create a new level of mind, take away all the doubt, the conjecture, the superstition, the dogma, and so that the person can actually understand what they're doing and why they're doing. So the how gets easier. And when the how gets easier, we assign meaning to the act because we understand what we're doing. And when we do that, we want a greater outcome. So I want to give people the information. And I looked at all the latest research that pointed the finger at human potential and human possibility. I had my own personal experience with a personal injury. We talked about it last time. I studied spontaneous remissions. I wanted to see what people had in common with each other. And I couldn't find the explanation pretty much in contemporary texts. I had to start looking at neuroplasticity and epigenetics. And then I wanted to see, well, now that I know what people did and I understood what they did to have their own personal healings and transformation, could I reproduce the effects? Knowing what they did, finding out what the commonalities were, putting it in the language of science and then teaching it to people. They could be sick or they could be well, it wouldn't matter. But understand what they did in order for them to change and have their life change. And after a couple years of teaching it, we started to see kind of the same type of effects in those people that were applying and doing something with it. So this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how.
He's so right on when he says that, son. It's a time to know how, not just a matter of knowing. You got to know how to do this. Like this is happening to a lot of people.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
Like his story alone is very interesting, and how he healed himself. But it's no longer pseudoscience. It's just not a thing. It can't be anymore.
But you have to be open to change, right? You have to be open to want to change and want something better in your life. And too often we wait for something tragic to happen before we even move forward to change.
Like I know there's a lot of in-depth stuff in here that it's going to cover a lot of ground, but like that's I can't get off that pseudoscience thing, because somebody deemed what's
alternative medicine,
what science actually is. And then science, without getting long-winded about this, science is not science if you're not asking how and why. It's just not. Yeah, this is so interesting, and I love this guy. He's like amazing. And you know what? There's so many other programs out there, other people that are finding, finding a way to reach themselves with the law of attraction and, positive thinking and Tony Robbins, those types of people, right? But this is another level, right? So the law of attraction obviously works to the point of positive thinking and positive way of life. But man, you're get people.
It's about getting control of your life rather than your life controlling you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But people are getting up out of wheelchairs. There's no law of attraction program that I'm aware of that makes that happen.
That blows my mind.
Right. His story itself is anyway. Let's carry on here.
Yeah.
So when we started seeing people stepping out of wheelchairs and having dramatic changes in their health, I knew that in some moment during the retreat or during their meditation, that something happened to them. They had an experience inwardly that must have changed them biologically. In other words, if you come into an event and you have 3 days to be together, and at the end of 3 days you're no longer in your wheelchair and you no longer have symptoms of MS, that the human being in me said, "Wow, that's amazing." The scientist in me said, "How? Like, how did that happen?" So that's when we started doing our own independent research, and that's when I started calling in neuroscientists and biologists and quantum physicists and really scientists to measuring heart rate variability to look to see what was going on in people that were coming to our events. So I could answer the question by saying now that the majority of the research that I look at is our own personal research, and we have the largest database in the world now on meditation and the mind-body connection.
I got to add one more thing. The largest database in meditation in that field, there's a lot of people, a lot of groups that do meditation, advanced meditation, and they have the largest scientific database. But that's pretty massive. Like, so if you're a non-believer in meditation, right? You're just out. You're just not buying into it at all. Well, you're buying into something.
You know
right?
what? But people don't take the time to work on themselves, to quiet their minds. You're in the rat race. You're going, you set your alarm. You're up every morning at 7. You're in the same routine, same. Because everybody does it. That's just what we do. And I think too often we just don't set aside time for ourselves to quiet our minds. Well, we're just on that wheel.
Right. Good point. Too often, we don't do it at all.
No, never.
You know why we don't do it? Because they don't teach it to you in school. You're just not allowed to talk about it. It's magic. It's a magic show.
You're trained to join the rat race and go.
Yeah, so I don't buy into the people are too busy to do this. They just don't know about it.
And they don't,
They just don't know about it. It's mainstream doesn't talk about it. Why? Don't get me going on that. That's another episode all by itself.
Okay, let's carry on.
And what we do is we really work on demystifying the process of change and transformation. And if we're able to demystify it, I think all of the measurements of the transformation that we're seeing is more information for me to teach transformation better. And I think that's how we close the gap between knowledge and experience. So we have a huge research team. We work with UC San Diego. We work with other universities like Harvard, Stanford. And the data is so compelling. And the data is so amazing that I think we're making scientific history right now.
Hundreds of millions of people have been drawn to you for their own reasons. My partner is one of them. My girlfriend, she has attended your events. She's one of your biggest fans in the world, and she's experienced her own transformation as a product of attending your events. But also, last conversation, if I look at the top comments, it's just a string of testimonials from people who have been engaged with your work for decades, who have had personal transformation in their life and their family. What is the essence of why people come to you? Like, if you think about the hundreds of millions of people that have interacted with your work, what do they have in common? What is it they're looking for?
People come for all kinds of reasons. The baseline is that they understand on some level that meditation can change their body and change their life. Some people understand that that they could have mystical experiences without using any exogenous substances. So we have people that come that want to heal their body, that want to have a new job or a new career or become abundant, people that want to have loving relationships, some people want to have mystical experiences, whatever that is, right? But the person is coming with the intention of actually creating exactly what they want. So that's what they think they're there for. But in time,
It's funny. I just want to point out a little sidebar here. Stephen Bartlett, who's the interviewer,
Right,
the host of the Diary of a CEO, great guy. But if you look back when Joe's talking to him in that scene there, I'm just going to slide this back a little bit.
right? But the person is coming with the intention of actually creating exactly what they want. So that's what they think they're there for. But in time,
So you saw what he was doing then, right? He's totally not connected to what Joe's saying. And he's distracted by his frickin' iPad.
I think he's writing notes, though, don't you think?
I don't care what he's doing. You're
Okay.
you're having an interview, you better listen, right? Like, seriously. And he kept looking up and smiling and whatever. And he's probably is writing notes, but he's not taking what
Well,
Joe's
it's no different than
laying down.
somebody on their phone. We were having a conversation with
Exactly.
them and they're not engaged, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then Joe kind of does a half-cracked smile because he knows, But this is why people get so busy in the rat race, and it gets so.
And what I wanted to add is part of the thing about change is I think all of us can be guilty of being reactive to everything, right? And when you make a conscious decision to change, you're being proactive. You're
Right.
getting ahead of it, right?
Right.
Living a purposeful life, changing and being in control of your life rather than everything around you controlling it.
Yeah. How long are you going to stay there, right?
Yeah, no kidding, right?
what they're really coming for is to change. And even the people who heal from all kinds of health conditions, what I learned in the last couple of years is they're not doing their meditations to heal. They're doing their meditations to change. And when they change, they heal. And so what they begin to crave is the next unknown experience, that experience that exists really beyond three-dimensional reality. But I would say that the majority of people come for a particular reason, and after a period of time, they just want to get more whole. And I don't think there's an end to that.
Is there a bug in our minds or in our society or within culture that stands in the way of our ability to change? And I think as I ask that question, what I'm really trying to get at is there's a culture that's emerged almost like a bit of a trauma culture where we kind of explain who we are based on what's happened to us. And it seems to be justified, i.e. this thing happened when I was a kid and that's why I am this way. Is that approach to viewing our trauma productive or unproductive? And is it a problem?
The stronger the emotion we feel from some event in our life, a trauma, a betrayal, a loss, a shock, a diagnosis, the event produces an emotional response. And the high quotient of the emotional response changes our internal state. And the moment we feel altered inside of us, the brain takes a snapshot, freezes a frame or a series of frames and takes snapshots, and that's called the long-term memory. So then, from a biological perspective, every time the person remembers the problem, they're producing the exact same chemistry in their brain and body. As if the event was happening.
Okay.
Cortisol, the adrenaline, whatever the emotion is. When they feel that emotion, we could say then that the body is reliving the event emotionally 50 to 100 times in a day. So the trauma is no longer in the brain at that point. Now the trauma is also in the body because thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And it's that thought and that feeling, it's that image and that emotion, it's that stimulus and response that's conditioning the body subconsciously to become the mind of that emotion. And now that person emotionally is branded into the past. And you can say to them, why are you this way? Why are you so angry? Why are you so bitter? Why are you so mistrusting? Why are you so afraid? And they'll say to you, I am this way because of these events or that event that happened to me in my life 20 or 30 years ago. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing because, in a sense, their identity is completely connected to their past.
What do you say? Their body is completely connected to the past. I can relate to that because I've had a lot of trauma in my life, as you know. I lost six people in 5 years, less than 5 years. And I get triggered very easily, as you know, and trying to calm my mind and not take myself back to the past when I got the phone calls of these people passing, and just staying in that trauma wheel and of identifying myself with, this is why I am the way I am.
Yeah,
Did that make any sense?
Of course, and it follows you, right?
It follows you, and
you become it.
You become it. You become this big bag of trauma, and leaving it behind. Not that I forget any of those people, but leaving the
event.
Yeah. Leaving the event behind. I'm still working on that. It's a process for sure. Because it compounded so quickly in my life. And I was in that hole for probably 6 years.
Right.
So moving forward and trying to be more purposeful as I move forward and leaving that trauma piece in my past, letting it go.
Yeah, like getting a better understanding of it and about it, because nobody wants to talk about it, right?
Right.
And understanding how this chemical process happens, just like Joe says here about, thoughts are the language of the mind and emotions are the language of the body. So when you think of that trauma, clearly you're dripping chemical from your brain and your body is learning.
And it takes you right back to that event. Yeah. And I think the old way of dealing with trauma, the old way of dealing with grief is nobody talked about it. Just forget about it. Just push it down. And at some point it's going to explode. It has to come out. You need to talk about these things in a healthy way, but not letting them control you and controlling your life.
Because, look around. Everybody that lives that life, and there's a lot of us that live that way, it's followed with disease and sickness.
Yeah,
right?
And eventually your body has to break down. It just can't live in that heightened state. Yep.
And as long as they feel that emotion, they'll always remember the past. So now, the body is so objective. When it feels that emotion, it does not know the difference between the real life experience that's creating the emotion and the emotion that person is fabricating by thought alone. So now, the body's believing it's living in the past event 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But what the person is really saying is, after that event, I haven't been able to change. That's what they're saying. And so that becomes the person's identity, and there's nothing wrong with this. But you'll never hear me say in any of the work that we do, go back and process the past. We've discovered that when a person analyzes their problems within the emotions of the past, they make their brain worse. They actually drive it further out of balance. They're over-arousing it. We discovered is that if the person can get beyond the emotion, truly get beyond the emotion, they'll free themselves from the past. And what we discovered is that if you teach a person to give up the fear, the bitterness, the resentment, the frustration, the impatience, the judgment, you just stop feeling that emotion. I know there's a reason why. I'm sure everybody's got a story, right? But there's nothing that's going to change that story until you change, right? And so we discovered that if you trade those emotions for an elevated emotion, if you start feeling gratitude and appreciation and love and kindness and care, and you practice feeling that emotion, we give you some tools to use, to change your breathing, to put your attention in a different place, and to work with your body. What we discovered is that when the person can truly begin to open their heart, and we have brain scans on this, when the heart begins to open and it begins to become coherent, in other words, when you're feeling frustration or impatience or judgment, your heart is beating very incoherently. When you're feeling love and gratitude, kindness and care, there's a rhythm, there's a cadence that the heart has that's very coherent. When the heart gets coherent, we measure this, it immediately informs the brain that the trauma is over. The heart tells the brain the past is over, the event is over, and it resets the baseline in the brain. And so now the person, when they look back at their past, they're no longer looking at it from the same level of consciousness. In fact, many of them will say, oh my God, I needed to go through all of that to get to this point right here. They'll tell you, they'll say, I wouldn't want to change one thing in my past because it got me to the present moment. Okay, so we work with Navy SEALs, special ops, prisoners. We work with people that have had some very serious traumas, have really serious abuses, just difficult childhoods. These people are, night terrors, suicidal, can't, leave their homes, socially having trouble, panic attacks. It's kind of funny because the moment that person actually breaks through from the emotion, and the words they typically describe, they say, was like my heart exploded. It's like my heart blew wide open. The moment that happens, they're bringing their body right out of the past, right into the present moment. And lo and behold, many times there goes the anxiety, there goes the depression, there goes the cyclic mood patterns. Somehow the body gets recalibrated back into order, back into homeostasis. So the point I'm making is that the memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. And now you're ready for the next adventure in your life. The soul can't go to the next adventure if it's holding on to the past. So we don't really ever address the story, because the story is only firing and wiring the same circuits in the brain, reaffirming the identity to the past just to feel the same emotion. And the research shows that 50% of the story we tell in our past isn't even the truth. That means that people are reliving a miserable life they never even had, just to excuse themselves from changing, right? And I'm not taking shots at anybody. But what I am saying is you can't tell me that your past was so brutal that you can't change. Because we have seen people with some really, really horrible pasts that literally are completely different people that have completely different lives.
And I think in order to change, you have to dip your toe into the past and recognize it, but you can't stay there. You can't let that grief and trauma and anxiety and depression and the PTSD hold you back.
Right.
We are the way we are because of our past. We recognize that, but don't live in the past with the trauma.
Yeah, like the problem that I have with all of this stuff is that nobody taught us this, right? They just keep cramming more crap on your plate and expecting you to just
keep absorbing.
Yeah. Right. So it's mind-blowing. It really is. It goes back to the education system, right? Don't teach you how to balance a checkbook, and don't teach you about what you need to know to stay healthy.
to actually live your life.
Yeah.